We are with Jenn Louis here at Chef's Club in New York, and today we're talking about her new book, Pasta by Hand. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I think when you see the title, Pasta by Hand, a lot of people go like, wait a minute, like not only am I scared of making pasta, I cannot make it without a bunch of crazy equipment.
For sure.
And so is that one of the reasons you wanted to write this book, to kind of show people?
Well, the book was actually an accident. I started to, when we opened our first restaurant, I started to make pasta. And I wanted to make everything in-house. And so we made pasta lunga, your long noodles like spaghetti and fettuccine. We made pasta corta, your short noodles like rigatoni. And we made pastina, your little ones that go into soup. And then we made pasta ripiena, which is like ravioli, stuffed pastas. And then we started making gnocchi. They didn't belong to any of the other categories that are already structured in Italian cuisine.
So what do you really need if you want to get started making pasta and you don't want to buy a bunch of stuff?
A bowl is super handy. A spoon is super handy. Simple stuff.
Easy.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the ingredients, because I think with pasta, one of the most important things is like buying a high quality flour, buying a high quality ingredients. You know, what do you think are the biggest mistakes that you see people make in terms of not getting the right stuff for pasta?
I think that ingredients, whatever you do, you want the best ingredients that you can buy. And that depends on your market. What you can get in different markets varies. With Italian food is about simplicity. And so there's not a lot of room to mess up. So if you have 5 ingredients, make those 5 ingredients really delicious, and that's it.
And what about texture? Because I think a lot of people say, oh, when I've tried to make pasta and roll it out or whatever, you know, it's too much dough, too much this, too much that. How do you counter that with the recipes in this book?
Well, dumplings really vary. So one made out of potato or ricotta cheese, those are going to be super tender and soft of what we think is like the most heavenly gnocchi, right? Well, something made out of beets, like a beet gnocchi or a chestnut flour gnocchi, are going to have some density to them. And so you have to really change your mind, say, oh, this is what the proper texture of this noodle will be.
So what are you making today? You're making us an amazing recipe.
Well, this one I really love. It was one of the first ones that I started to make out of my book, and it's called strozzopreti. And strozzopreti means pre-stranglers. This is a really delicious one. I'm using kale today. It's very lovable. It's one of the first that I learned to make, and it's very tasty.
Wonderful. Well, can I get out of your way and will you show us the steps?
Let's do it. So the first thing I do is I blanch my kale. Blanching kale is a very simple process of taking kale leaves, putting it in salted boiling water, just so it can absorb some of that flavor, and then immediately, when it becomes tender, putting it in ice water so that it can shock and get cold really, really fast. The leaves before I blanched them with the kale were about 3/4 of a pound. From there, what I do is I take the kale, I wring it out with my hands. It doesn't have to be perfect, but get most of the moisture out so the moisture doesn't go into your food. Then I chop it very, very fine, just like this, so I can make the strozzopreti. Strozzopreti are very simple. It's ricotta, and ricotta can come very, very different textures. This one is perfect. It's moist, you can see how moist it is, but there's no pooling water around the sides. So all I'm gonna do is add the cheese to my kale. I have about a cup plus a couple tablespoons of ricotta cheese in here. It is a rustic dish. I'm just adding my ricotta, kale, Parmigiano, and it's grated very, very fine. It's about a cup and a tablespoon of Parmigiano, very finely grated. 1 egg, just a little bit of breadcrumbs, and that's gonna absorb some of the moisture. My last ingredients are just a little bit of salt, and you don't wanna make them too salty. The ricotta and their Parmigiano have some salt to them, so adding too much salt will make it a little too salty. Fresh nutmeg is a big part of Italian cuisine. You see it in a lot of savory foods, something that's a little bit different than the US, and it provides a really nice warm flavor. So again, I just put everything into a bowl. You don't need fancy equipment. They didn't have them in the old days in Italy, and it works very, very beautifully. You want to stir until everything is fully combined and homogeneous. Since we have our batter, it's delicious, it's perfectly seasoned. What we want to do is scoop our strozzopreti. On a lined sheet tray, I add a generous amount of all-purpose flour. You can use 2 spoons, very simply, or a small scoop, and scoop small balls of our batter, making sure that there's no gaps in them, but you don't want to press too hard. I roll them in the flour just to coat. And the coolest thing about this is that the flour is going to form almost like a thin noodle around the filling as the moisture from the filling adheres to the flour. So I just continue to form until all of the balls are scooped and they're really nicely rolled into the flour. And then I'll store them in the refrigerator for usually a few hours just so they can set up. While they're setting up, I'll rotate them and roll them through the flour just so they coat evenly. I would probably store them in the refrigerator for at least 4 hours, but up to 36. So the strozzopreti have been in the fridge for a few hours and they're really nicely set. One of the things I like to do is take my thumbs on the side of the tray and shake just so that they move around and the tops get full with the flour that's on the bottom and vice versa, and they're nicely coated and evenly coated. To cook them, I drop them into seasoned boiling water very gently, and you don't want to boil it hard, just a good simmer. The thing you want to think about with cooking most gnocchi is when they start to rise, then you want to remove them from the water. I like to put my spoon all the way in the bottom of the pan and give it a stir. That way I won't disturb any of the dumplings, but I can get them moving around a little bit and they won't stick to the bottom. It usually takes about 1 to 2 minutes for the dumplings to start to rise. As soon as they float, remove them into some melted butter, seasoned with a little salt, and make sure they're fully coated with butter. Italians will often serve a little bit more butter on the plate than we're typically used to, so that you can use a little piece of bread to mop up any extra. These are wonderful with a little bit of Parmigiano over the top. Thank you for watching. These are my strozzopreti from Tuscany in my book, Pasta Bucket.